Hey everybody, thanks once again for tuning in and Happy New Year. So today I'm just going to be reviewing the 6 different shoes that we took to 300 miles last year in 2023. I'm going to talk about things I like the most, things I like the least, and most importantly, how many miles you can expect to get for each of them. So the first one right out of the block here was this Asics Novablast 3. The 3 features I liked about this shoe were first, the cushioning. It's listed as a max cushion shoe, but you could surprise me. I would say it's medium cushion at best. It's really quite firm. I liked it a lot, and the more I wore it, the more it broke in, the more I liked it. Second was responsiveness. Generally with shoes, certain ones seem to do better, faster or slower with their responsiveness. This shoe seemed to give the same amount of responsiveness throughout. Didn't matter what speed, what type of run, so really very consistent responsiveness. And the third thing was the grip on this shoe was just fantastic. Stood out more than really any of the other shoes, and so it's definitely worth mentioning. Now the 2 things that I disliked about it was, first off, was the amount of migration and movement I would get with this tongue. It's funny, when I first got it and it had that type of this cut here on the top, I thought, wow, that's a great idea, it's going to be super, but this tongue just moved a lot for me. The other item is, I talked about, well, it's a consistent run. It was kind of a somewhat boring. I was expecting more from this shoe because it just came, everybody talked about how much they liked it, so I was expecting more. Just uninspiring but solid. And then as far as the mileage goes, I rated this as a 400 mile shoe, so for $140, 400 miles, that's pretty good miles for your money. Next up, the Nimbus 25. This was quite an interesting shoe for me. Very cushy, soft. It felt like running around in slippers. What I liked the most, actually, is when I was done with my 300 miles on this shoe and I just relegated it just to one of my walking shoes. I love it for walking. Even today, several months after it took it out of the running rotation. And the other item I really liked was the way this tongue stood in place. I just talked about how this one migrated. This one was fantastic. Now, for the 2 things I disliked, they're related to the things I liked. I love it for walking. Obviously, I didn't like it that much for running. Too soft, kind of squishy for me. I didn't get much response, so it wasn't a good match for me for running. And then I talk about this tongue, how much I liked it and stayed in place. Not that it's that thick and all, but just the way it's gusseted and held in place. I thought the shoe really ran hot. It seemed to just didn't breathe anywhere near as well as most of the other shoes you see here in this rotation. Now for the great news, if you like this shoe and it works for you, this is my highest mileage sneaker. I think you can expect to get over 500 miles on this one. As much as I've used it and walked with it, I mean, there's just still a ton of life left on this. Great miles for your money if you like it. So we go from one of the heaviest shoes that I have ever worn to what at the time was the lightest shoe that I'd ever worn, the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. If you looked at my review, you know this is pretty much my favorite shoe that I've ever run in. For me, it's a Goldilocks. It just, everything that I needed it to do, it did great. I just loved all the miles with this one, the different types of runs. My favorite shoe. But that doesn't mean there couldn't be a couple little tweaks to improve it. First, the grip. This grip was terrible in the rain. I got to the point, if it was wet out, I just didn't even wear it. And then the other thing was, I wore this for the Berlin Marathon, and I did wear it on some longer runs, but I would say that it's best for runs of maybe 12 to 15 miles or so. As much as I loved it, by the time that Berlin Marathon, I was just tired and ready to take them off at the end. All that being said, just a wonderful shoe, my favorite one to date. And as for the mileage, I think at 300 miles, we pretty much have made it to the end. I had one through the rubber outsole here. You could maybe get another 50 miles, but let's just say this is a shoe good for 300 miles. So next up was the Brooks Hyperion Max. This is the lightest shoe I'd ever worn. Next, I bought these, and now this is the lightest shoe I'd ever worn. And not only light, it was somewhat flimsy. I think it's kind of dried out a bit now. It doesn't seem quite as pliable as it did at the time. But when I first got this, how light it was, how pliable it was, I said, boy, this shoe, I'll be surprised if it makes it to 300 miles. Well, first let's go back and I'll tell you about the fit. I think it was so light and pliable. I just simply loved the way this shoe fit my foot. It just was the best form, fitting, hugging shoe that I've worn. I have very narrow feet, and I know this shoe runs narrow, so you know what may be great for me might not be great for somebody else, but I just love the fit. The other thing that I really liked about it was the energy return, and I'm going to say this had a sneaky energy return. And what I mean by that was when I'd be out running and I wasn't necessarily feeling like the bounce, the spring, any of that, or the rock from this Hyperion Max, yet when I was done running, I'd always seem to go quicker than what I thought I had been doing. And that was really all different paces. And so what's not to like about that, right? That sneaky energy return. Now, for the one thing I disliked about it, and was a pretty big deal, was if you look at this tongue, right, very thin laser cut, and it has this little ridge on the side that isn't covered with the same material, this softer ridge. I kept having a problem with that ridge would sometimes double over, more on my left shoe than my right, and I would try and make sure it was nice and tight and straight, but when that little thing doubled over, it would really start to rub on my foot, and that was something I hadn't really experienced before with any shoe. I usually don't get hot spots necessarily like that, especially from the tongue, but it happened a lot. Again, this is kind of a small, you would think an easily fixed tweak in the design, so we'll see. The other item I'll mention, and it's actually very similar to this one, this light thin shoe and padding. My feet just got a little tired in it with it. I wore this one for Mesa Falls Marathon. Yeah, and that had went some road to trail and all that, and I remember by the end of that one I was ready to get it off my foot. But otherwise, I mean, this is just a great shoe. And as far as the miles on it, of all the surprises of these 6 shoes out here, as I said in the beginning, when I first got this, as light as it was and just kind of how thin and pliable, I thought, man, this thing will never make it to 300 miles. But boy, was I wrong. It's really held up quite well. This got that kind of strange heel shaved off design here, but there's still a good amount of wear left on that one. So I think you get another 100 miles out of this shoe, no problem. Which, again, the most surprising thing to me. So there you go, 400 miles on the Brooks Hyperion Max. Next we got the Hoka Clifton 9. So I bought this shoe for one reason, to take it on my first ultra marathon. I ended up being a lot of trail in it. It was a Highball to Thurman ultra marathon, and the reason I got it and what I liked best about it was on the trails, it's fairly cushioned. It's got a maximum cushion shoe, but I just love the landing base on this and the grip on this shoe. I've never run in trail shoes, so I needed one I could use for the trails but then also use for roads. And initially I was going to use this one for the trails, and I knew it just wasn't working that well, but this worked fantastic. So I just love how solid and firm and reliable this was on the landing base, and again the cushion was great for trails, and I really liked the fit of this one as well. But then taking it out on the roads is just a little bit too soft, and one of the max cushion shoe that they're similar to this Nimbus. Yeah, just not enough energy return for me, and I just like something a little bit more firm and more responsive than I get from this shoe. And also, this shoe it's quite padded throughout. This one definitely ran hot. So while it was great for me on the trails, not so much on the roads. As far as the mileage goes, so this was my second pair of Hokas, and what's funny about them is while there's generally a good amount of there's still some life left on this sole, what responsiveness there is in that one seems to be gone for me by mile 300. And funnily enough, I look back to my other Hoka review and I said the same thing, and then I looking online, other people said, yeah, they think this shoe just goes flat by mile 300. So Hoka Clifton, I think you can expect to get 300 miles out of this one. And that brings us to the very last shoe that we brought to at least 300 miles, New Balance SuperComp version 2. Never has a love affair with a shoe ended so abruptly as it did for me with this one. When I first put it on, I thought I loved everything about it as well. The grip, especially the responsiveness. It was light, it was airy. I said, this is going to, the Endorphin speed now is going to have some competition, but we ended up on the rocks pretty quick. And I'll tell you, the problem was taking this out on runs. For some reason, I just felt that we were mismatched. I almost felt like this shoe wanted somebody who ran faster than I did. It did great on tempo runs. I felt the best with that. On slower runs, it just was not a great or comfortable ride. It just didn't seem to work for me. But then the big issue was the grip on this thing. Before I even made it to 100 miles, I had already wore through this outer rubber sole. And now I took this to mile 263. I wore it for the New York City Marathon. We haven't posted that race yet. It's in production. We'll get it out there at some point. But that brought me to 263, and I said, I'm done with this shoe. I just can't run with it anymore. You know, I mean, that's all you've got to see on this thing. I've never been more disappointed in a shoe. And then as this started to go, as you can imagine, the grip on it just wasn't as good. And the ride was altered when this thing just started to wear away like it did. So really disappointed in this shoe. If you're going to say how many miles can I get for my money on the New Balance SuperComp version 2, I'm going to tell you 200 miles, which comes out to about $1 per mile for as much as this shoe costs. There you have it. There we go. 2023 in a wrap up. Thanks so much for watching. Hope your New Year's resolutions involve signing up for a race somewhere, getting out and running. Just remember, life is good. Life is even better when you run. So get out there, exercise, explore, enjoy, and race the nation.